That crew shining bright. Move.
Come on in.
This is
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That Crew Podcast Network presents and speaks with Queen Mother Dr. Chen. Live every first and third Thursday at 8 p.m. EST. Culture, healing, heritage, spirituality, Caribbean roots and African diaspora rising. From St. Croix shores to the world so wide, Queen Mother Dr. Chen brings truth with pride. Culture in the rhythm, wisdom in the sound, healing for the people, roots in sacred ground. She keeps the story, she keeps it alive. African diaspora, we rise and thrive. Caribbean voices, bold and free, honoring ancestors, shaping destiny. As we speak, so let the people know, culture and healing in a reggae flow. As this speaks, heritage strong, spiritual wisdom all night long. Every first and third Thursday, tune in live. 8 p.m. EST, come feel the vibe. We rise, we seek, Queen Mother Dr. Chen, I speak. This kickstanding, preserving the flame, teaching our people to honor the name. Perrank moving with chats for life, culture, healing, art, spirit and life. Technology, community, wisdom too, building up the people in all we do, from island roots to globe.
And greetings, Hotep, peace, and welcome yet again to another live broadcast of Oz Speaks, Building a New Legacy here on the Crew Podcast Vibration. Again, extending thanks to all of the work being done by our illustrious sister queen and visionary, Angela. I think it's powerful to be able to share that while we are here, we are also looking at different opportunities of things that are taking place in the community, things that are impacting the lives of each and every one of us. And we would always like to start with a reflection and a moment of silence. And at the same time, we're also looking at ways in which we can begin to speak and give utterances that honor our infinite creator and source by the names that we choose, also honoring those that came before us. And I'd like for persons to be really clear that when we speak of ancestral veneration, we're speaking of it from a place of how do you build legacy? How do you strengthen how persons see themselves in regard to sovereignty, liberation, power, spiritual centeredness, divine righteousness, or more appropriately for those that may understand this a little better, truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony. That one. And in an ancestral space linked to I Speaks, we refer to that as the principles linked within and imbued in the divine principle of Ma'at. And I encourage persons to stem from that space and that root as we begin to have a short versation here this evening, because there's so many different observances as were shared earlier in this particular month. There's a lot of transition. There's a lot of changes, a lot of huh, whirlwinds. This is a time where persons have just completed observances, commemorations, celebrations on the 139th anniversary of the birth of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey of Jamaica. I think it's really important that persons also look true inside of themselves, inside of their vibrational spaces of shifts, that they begin to share how they look at life, strength, and prosperity through various lenses. I think it's too that this is a good opportunity for persons to speak of, when we talk about Marcus Messiah Garvey, we're talking about the formulator, the lead, alongside a very powerful circle and sphere of not only tens of thousands of delegates representing the Universal Negro Improvement Association, African Communities League in the early portions of the 20th century, 1914 moving forward, but also to the millions upon millions of registered, dues paying, engaging, active organizers and members around the globe. I think it's very important, and I encourage persons that are tuned in, that desire to learn more, that they begin to look at entities that are available. For example, there are if you look at the African American Legacy Network, and I encourage persons just go to legacynetwork.tv, and you'll be able to see and learn a little bit more in a short amount of time of the work, the contributions, the significant research, the significant examples, the significant organizational efforts, and the development and establishment and institutionalization of a government for African people that was put in place even at the height of lynchings and other forms of injustice plaguing humanity in the early 20th century globally. So I just encourage persons when we speak of these things to look at that through that particular lens. I think it's also important to highlight that this is a very challenging time, as there's been this frequency of finding unalived bodies and unalived body parts of people, specifically people of African ascent. And I think that's a very important piece. Not to say that it's not happening to other people and other ethnicities in the globe. However, the frequency of seeing this unalivedness, and yes, I said unalivedness, of our people of African ascent, I think it's very critical and very important that we spend some significant time on that reflection, on that interpretation, on that moment or moments, because it's impacting and creating a form of stress, a form of anxiety, a form of fear that is very similar to what transpired in the early 20th century, very similar to what transpired during the period of enslavement, of the active onset, more direct chattel enslavement, and colonization and all of its extractive, exploitative elements make this seem, it may not be familiar to some that do not study these things, but this is familiar to many. And I think that it's really important for us to look at these things, speak of these things in a very engaging, uplifting way. I think it's very important. And I'm saying these things from a lens of how do we begin to talk about these things where it does not just create fear and anxiety and more stressors and more hostility and antagonisms. And I'm speaking of these things primarily because there is a time and place for us to have what people like to call difficult conversations. I like to refer to it as methodical reasoning. And I must give credence to those that are now part of the ancestral realm, those that have gone before me, that guided me with that understanding of what the principles of truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony bring into fruition. And I say this through a lens of recently hearing a particular individual in our community here in the Virgin Islands of the US pass judgment, very hostile judgment, for someone in the same community honoring their forefathers, their foremothers, for being able to achieve a particular space and a particular status and a particular balanced life in these times of 2026. And I always encourage persons, if we can go all the way back 2,000 years plus and honor illuminated ones, honor those great leaders or forerunners of different society, civilization, institution, and more, then we should give a moment of pause. I won't say a moment of silence, but a moment of sacred remembrance and reflection to our parents that are no longer here with us on the earth plane, especially for the good and great work that they do. For our grandparents, and maybe they may have not been perfect, none of us are, but to hear someone that is part of a wider circle of leadership and engagement and intelligence, or at least we thought they were, to pass judgment on against persons that are simply giving credence, respect to venerated ancestors. And I need persons to be clear, because some persons speak of ancestors like we're doing like this ghosty hoodoo voodoo kind of vibe, forgetting that that's not what we're speaking of. We're speaking of it from a space of you're showing reverence to those that came before you, that give you the guidance and the principled knowledge and wisdom, specifically wise counsel, to live a life that is grounded to the best of our ability, I should say, in truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony. So, and I say these things because, again, all you have to do is wear a head tie, have a couple of different rings on your fingers, and extra African cloth. It could be designed like a three-piece suit. But the minute people see those fabrics, that textile that begins to speak truth is power of our previous greatness in a space that is very ancestral. I'm going to use African because people recognize, this is from West Africa, North Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, East Africa. I feel that this is a time, and I'm saying this on the eve to lend grounding to what we're going to talk about a little shortly in tonight's podcast. We speak of peace. We speak of loving our fellow woman and man. We speak of love for family. We speak of community and society and nation and the upliftment and the protection and the security of family, community, society, etc. However, many times we say we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. We speak of our husbands and wives and children and leaders honoring the Creator in all of our works and deeds. And then we speak of judgment through a lens of do not judge, for ye shall be judged, right? And we say these things, and then all it takes is that human experience of, well, they are talking about ancestors and it's the devil and demon worship. And I am using this moment for us to get past that, because that's another form of terrorism. And I need persons to hear me clearly, because this is affecting our ability to operate as you are my sister and I am your sister's keeper. You are my brother and you are my brother's keeper. So you need to either pick one. Just be evil, period, and destroy the relationships with our human family in a very demonic way, because that's demonism, or navigate how we can work together and show principled love and joy, even through the things, even through the selective practices, not the principles. I might walk to my house going north to south. You may walk to my house going east to south. Hopefully, we will still get south to the house. But if we're going to go to war and curse people when we just finished saying that that vibration of cursing is very low level, low energy, yet we speak of walking as believers and guide those that are guided by word, the word, and we are guided by the principles of that which humbly respects and honors the illuminated one of light by many names. And I say this because we're going through this type of a situation even in institutions of higher education, secondary education, elementary education, post-secondary, vocational. We're experiencing this through a lens because persons choose to just study like one thread of the truth, and then jump and skip and bounce from that one thread instead of honorably respecting that the sun does not discriminate on where the rays go. And the sun is a astronomical reflection and representation of that which is infinite, omnipresent, universal. And again, by the respectful, honorable, venerated names that we refer to the Supreme Being, the Almighty, the Creator. And I'm saying all of these things for a couple of reasons. When we look at what's happening in the world today, and I'm going to use right here in the Virgin Islands, we are experiencing a very low energy shift that is very reflective of what's happening in the rest of the world. We have brothers and sisters that we need to send prayers and disaster relief, money, resources, and more to the best of our ability. Because when we're speaking of these things, and so just for those that are grateful beyond measure, thank you. We are encouraging our brothers and our sisters to send prayers of healing, mercies to our brothers and sisters in Hawaii that have experienced undue disaster, even to the point of the uprooting of ancestral ceremonial lands and grounds, cemeteries, and spaces where their ancestors for centuries have been placed and just left to rest. In addition to losing homes, in addition to losing institutions, schools, spiritual houses, etc. We're sending the same thing to places like Colombia and Venezuela that have endured earthquakes that have killed hundreds and possibly thousands in those spaces. We're sending those prayers to our sisters and brothers in Haiti that are still struggling to just live in accordance to the sovereignty that they were one of the first to secure in this Caribbean space as free Africans in a Caribbean isle. We're sending the same prayers of strength because we're seeing that there's this hostility against any independent, sovereign, moving, thinking, thank you, Sister Queen Trevita, in spaces like Cuba. And this is not a jerk or a jaunt at the persons that feel, if you're pro Cuba, wonderful. If you're not pro Cuba, that's your position. But at this point, what is happening with these embargoes and these limitations of allowing resources for human life to continue and exist in Cuba on this time in the 21st century is inhumane, it is criminal, and it's unjust, and has nothing to do with any elevation of godliness or righteousness. When I have sisters and brothers that barely have enough resource to get water, that do not have power, electricity for days, when you're hearing physicians say they have to choose which persons are they going to be able to save in hospitals because they do not have enough resources to save all. That is criminal. That is terrorism. And it is not acceptable in this region. It might be happening, but that is not acceptable. And I say this from a place, and you don't have to believe me. You can just pretty much so go and see that we're dealing with the distractions of the media. And I call that part, I call the distractions of the media. Okay, we're going to put a stronger embargo. We're going to stop gas from coming there. We're going to interfere with resources coming there. We're going to make sure that the drought hits them even harder. If you are a person in this human family that cares about humanity, then play fair. Do things in a form that supports truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony. You don't strip people of the very core of their humanity and then say that you are humanitarian and that you are civilized. That is uncivilized. You would like to harm people in these spaces. That's uncivilized. And this is just me speaking on this side. So when we're hearing about the increased frequency of youth, male primarily, and some females being found lynched in the 48 contiguous US. Again, just keep in mind, this is happening on the eve and the vibrational shift of storms, earthquakes, what's the other, tornadoes and rainstorms. And here, and I'm saying this while I knock on wood, we have a hurricane season. It's not autumn, winter, spring, and summer in this part of the Caribbean and the Virgin Islands. We have hurricane season from June to November. So we're speaking from a space of many of us have survived and thrived, irrespective of the dangers that we are exposed to by the elements, even if these elements have been interfered with and forced into a space of chaos and imbalance by human intervention. Climate change is one part, but even the more that you keep digging and digging and fracking and extracting from the earth, Mother Earth will quake. Mother Earth will bleed. And we have to get to a place where, collectively speaking, and again, I'm not a geologist, it's not my area, but I'm just saying if you keep digging at the core of the planet and you keep putting up these various efforts of saying that the only thing we can do is oil refinement at a time where we need to start expanding our resources and our correct use of the resources that we have. When you see drought in places that are usually have an abundance of water, that means something needs to shift. If you see flooding in areas that usually have a balanced relationship with the rains and the waterways to the point that it's causing loss of life significantly, When we're seeing, and I can speak to that because we get, sometimes you might even hear the little ding, because we have a emergency management system that authentically shares with us there's been an earthquake 4.8. Sometimes they go up to 7. They're not right here in the Virgin Islands, but they're near us. And we're only 84 square miles, so the earth, the water just has to go, and that's that. So when we say keep our humanity in prayer, we're speaking of that through the lens of the chaos that happens from man, from humans amongst humans and their relationship with the earth, plant, mineral life, and animals. And we're always also speaking to that relationship that humans have with the greater source, God to some, Oludumare to others, Netara to others, Allah to some, and all those venerated names that we speak of the Creator. And I'll say Creator, infinite, almighty, illuminated. And I'm using these terms because sometimes English can be very limiting, and sometimes we misrepresent and literally get ready to go to war over words when the essence of what we're speaking of is simply to honor sacred ancestral wisdom and guidance. Obviously, you could tell that something did happen in our community that is making this shift in how we speak about culture, healing, arts, technology, and spirituality that support life in this frame of our ancestral sovereignty, not just any sovereignty, not just a political sovereignty, because that's the man made portion, but that sovereignty that is coming forth with sacred intention that honors our role and our place and the responsibilities that come with that role and that place as humans. I don't always agree, none of us do, I'm sure, with everything that some of our brothers and sisters may say or their perceptions on how things should be done. However, one thing I've learned is that you listen, you use silence as a tool of engagement, support, and honor. And you also remember that there's always that sacred intelligence and presence that is omnipotent, omnipresent, that is greater, more and more expansive than just your individual self, especially when it comes to this flesh. I had to catch myself just in hearing some of the horrific actions that humans are engaged in the earth plane at this particular time, in this particular iteration of our existence. Things that persons are doing to children, infants, the manner in which persons have become almost catatonic. There's no, almost like no feeling when we hear of death and murder and blood sacrifice. And I want to be very clear, of human beings in spaces that are supposed to be claiming to be areas of civilization. I also know that some of these things are surfacing as people speak of the last days, Armageddon, the apocalyptic nature of humanity's disrespect, disregard, and disharmony when it comes to honoring sacred ancestral light and that of the wisdom that has been gifted through the lens of spiritual systems. For some, they're religious institutions. For many, the way you live, not just believe, the way you live, the way you know, the way you honor entities that are greater than yourself. Thank you for that, Sister Queen Alma. And we need to quote that one. The world has gone mad. Exactly. Good evening, Sister Queen Patrice. And I think it's important that persons recognize what we're speaking of when we're talking about these things. So that's why you have more people attempting to put more people so they can have a new cohort, let's call it that, a new crew of labor that is free. Free labor to the extractors, but unfree in regard to being able to contribute into the human family. And I'm speaking of those that are forced into, or by happenstance, or by demonic circumstance, end up incarcerated unjustly. And some that are incarcerated with cause due to injustices they were experiencing, have been subjected to through their lives because of an extractive, unjust, demonic system that does not respect humanity, life, or anything in between. So I've been listening to a number of our other broadcasters and hearing that vibrational shift of persons. I'm still recovering from some of the persons that should be in prison and should be under some very serious form of rehabilitative engagement, reprogramming from the spiritual space through their psychological imbalances. However, I'm seeing that doesn't seem to happen because some of these persons have connections and linkages and are able to slip and slide like a parasite going inside of a host. In contrast to innocents that have spent decades upon scores in prison unjustly. So that's the other part that's linking to what I'm speaking to. When we speak of building a new legacy, it's incorporating, yes, what has happened in the past, what is happening now, and what our vision, projections and action are for the future. And it should not be that we are spending all of our time just judging. I don't like you because you said so and so, and my way is the way, or you need to go. We have to work on what does that look like so that we can work more harmoniously through a lens of human harmony with wise, you're going to keep hearing me say wise counsel. I really am grateful for this particular network for a number of reasons, because some of these things I might not be able to say in certain public FCC governed platforms. And some of these things I may not say in frameworks that may affect what some of us do in our day activities, and I don't, let's call it a job, but in our careers. So I've always given that respect to our sisters and brothers, especially, no diss, but especially to our sisters who hold strength and do things from an entrepreneurial lens unapologetically. I have to tip my crown in that regard. And I also honor the brothers that are able to support our sisters that do that with respect, with loyalty, and that they are honoring the space that is very hard to hold as a free thinking, free moving, sovereign being in this planet that is doing everything, well, in certain circles, everything in its power to dismantle the very core of our humanity in every part of the earth where they can go and extract, like a parasite that has no, that doesn't stop eating and doesn't stop eating. It's worse than, for the, I guess I'm dating myself when I say Pac-Man, but you know what I'm getting to. That it's like a consistent devouring of that which is joyous, that which is uplifting, that which is truthful, that which is engagingly loving. We say peace and love, but do we practice that? And the other reason that some of this is coming off of Queen Mother, Dr. ChenziRa's vibration this evening, is because of the frequency in which I like officiating. You know, as an ordained minister, I love doing what I just want people to know. I love doing marriages, house blessings, blessing ways of the term. In many African traditions, we wait till the baby comes and is safe and the mother and father are safe. And then we do a big bash and prayers and all of that and offerings and gifts. But I recognize that in the tradition on this side of the Atlantic, many times there's a shower before the baby comes forward. I like doing those too. But to see that the frequency of some of our ministerial work amongst those of us that move in this form is all about celebrations of, we actually had to shift it from calling it a funerary rite and call it a celebration of life. And many times it's not for old people. I love when it's for people that are old. Let me be more specific. I love when it's for centenarians, not when they're 17, 18, 19, 20, 30, 40, just getting into certain prime. And recently here in the Virgin Islands, we had a 4-year-old who obviously got access to his father's weapon, dead one time. And granted, you know, with a lot of engagement, the authorities have since arrested the father. So who's hurt the most when we hear of these things? Because that means the whole family is mashed up. No. We have, and I mentioned this in a previous broadcast, and I reiterate it, when persons feel that it is permissible and that they are untouchable to where they can not only attack a law enforcement official, but that they can ambush them in front of their home and think scot free in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And then some arrests. You know, usually what happens is we do the reactionary piece. You hear the news, so and so got murdered, it was horrible, and then the rumors start, and then we're not sure what happened, and then there's no real conversation, and persons are overwhelmed beyond measure because this is affecting families. This is affecting communities. As we are having this particular broadcast in our community here in St. Croix, persons impacted by this very real event are speaking to heal and offer comfort in these communities so persons can at least feel comfortable attempting to lay their head to rest, raise their children and families, embrace their elders and those that have special needs in these communities. While there's this wanton injustice vibration, like a tornado, like a hurricane, like a parasite that appears to walk on two legs. I just think people need to really feel and hear. So when we speak of sand, sea, sun, and the joys of the Caribbean, which does exist here, just know that just like in the 48 contiguous, just like in spaces like Haiti, just like spaces in Sudan where there have been millions executed and terrorized and raped, right? That it happens in even little small spaces like this space on this particular island of St. Croix Virgin Islands. So I'm always honored to be able to have a opportunity to share that there we could complain, but we're looking at intervention and interventions that are going to come from a variety of spaces. Some people are going to pray to prayer which is never ending. Some are going to chant words of power, words of praise in different languages. Let's remember that. With different expression. Some will be very silent and just be silent like Diksha for a month. Some will play music or singing bowls, not to throw off person's energy, but to give balance so that persons can thrive and not only survive in this chaotic time frame. So when we talk about building a new legacy, and when we say Ast speaks for those that are new in this versation, we're speaking of ancestral, sacred, sovereign traditions. Ancestral, sacred, sovereign traditions. And it's also tied to the divine feminine because that is a name given in ancestral teachings way far back, ancient, way far back, millennia, the principles of Ast, known as the divine mother and the divine feminine. And I share that, and I know that sometimes, because we're all learning, we are we never stop learning until that last breath, and then it goes into the spiritual realm because spirit is eternal. This flesh, it will go back to ash and dust, but spirit is eternal, and especially spirit in alignment with the almighty creator. And I say that because for some reason there seems to be persons, again, in our midst here and in other parts of the world, that are totally misrepresenting that which is sacred, that which is spiritual, that which honors creative source. Maybe, let me be real clear. Creator, source, the source. Because you may say Jesus. If you speak to somebody in Spanish, they're going to say Jesus. Some people will speak of the Elohim and the Eloha. Some will say angels, right? Some say God. Some say Yahweh or Yahweh. I'm just saying there's so many different ways that because there's 8 billion people on the planet and counting. And this is this time, like no, in these 21st century. But just know that there's been a progression of how we grow, how we learn, how we embrace each other or not. And I am really, I'm touched by, it's because there's so many distractions. Not even AI, artificial intelligence can keep up with all of this. That's why it keeps morphing. And it's important that we recognize that. We don't wish to lose our sacred humanity behind a lens of chaos and distractions. No matter who's on top or who's president or not, or who is the prime minister or not, or who is leading the particular entity or not. Terrorism has a way of being so extractive that real terrorists that dismantle the very core of humanity will call other people that are attempting to save the lives of humanity terrorists. I don't need to give examples of them. I think we have enough of them. And I'm really encouraging our listeners, our viewers, just take a moment of reflection of what could we change collectively. Maybe change isn't the proper term. Maybe what could we transform a little bit at a time, even though it needs to happen like now. But what can we, because we don't, we have a saying here, time is longer than twine. And I'm sure there's a similar proverbial phrase in all the places where we have raised and grown up. But what is it that we could do together? What is at least one or two things? Don't try to get the whole 10. Let's just think of one or two things that we can do together that elevates our humanity, that elevates our, not just our understanding, but our compassionate love and care and loyalty and mercy for one another, instead of waiting until the Christmas holiday to talk about joy to the world. How do we celebrate that joy to the world 365 days and 366 days in a year, leap year, 24/7? So that the next time you see a youth getting ready to spray a community, it's not just the videotape of what's going on, but there is some sacred intervention without you incurring harm. What is the way that you can look, pray, chant, sing, move around an entity that is imbalanced, that feels that they should take the life of others? How do you shift that? And how do we purge this earth plane of systems that are not ecologically balanced to the point that human life is being destroyed, extracted, annihilated, almost every squinet smaller than a second of every day? How do we restore harmony on this earth plane? Not to say that every earthquake will stop, but they will not be so frequent and so devastating, where people are finding cats alive, but the bodies of humans underneath are just almost ignored. And what do we say to leaders that really don't lead well? Do we turn our back? And if we are going to turn our back, make sure that when we turn our back, that it's not with a bullseye on it. Make sure if we're going to turn our back or just be silent, that we don't give power to the demonic energy and overlook the venerated power of sacred spirit in how we move and how we gather and how we engage. I again encourage persons. If you have questions, you have commentary, you think that there's something that we should share in a more engaging format, I encourage that. I know that there are a number of brothers and sisters that might be listening and, what happened to Dr. Jen, right? But it's not that. It's just there is a lot that's happening that we do not get a chance to give words to. And many people feel so powerless. We talk about depression. There has to be like a more engaging word than just depression. It's not just being depressed. It is a form of being so overwhelmed that you think you're tired, you think you're sleepy, but it's a weariness because it's like grinding into the very core of every part of our bone structure, every part of our emotional soul selves. And it's no longer being tolerated. So make sure you add joy. Even if it's a small way. Make sure you put your feet in some. If you're not fortunate to be near a freshwater lake where you don't have to, or a water pond where you don't have to worry about something coming and chewing you, right? Because got to remember, some people will make the mistake and go in places where there's animals that can harm you. Make some chamomile tea, and after you finish drinking the tea, to stay calm and your nervous system handling all of the distractions in a peaceful way. When you're done, the bush, even if it's a tea bag, put all of it with some extra warm water and soak your feet. Take some warm compresses with lavender oil and tap them around your neck, around your shoulders, on your wrists, on your crown, and especially by your pui, that place that we forgot that was very sensitive when we were coming through the birth channel, right? If you can do a lovely sea salt bath with some nice healing crystals and some fragrant oil that has essential healing properties, even better. Those of you that have the joy and privilege of having access to really nice spas that are within our range of affordability, and I say that straight, do so. If you're able to go to a place where you are surrounded with prayers of joy and upliftment and fellowship, do that. What I am encouraging is for us to transform our humanity. Because building a legacy, especially building a new legacy, is going to require a new humanity if there's going to be sustainability. If we don't wish for our grandchildren, great grandchildren, and great relatives to continue this over and over and over and over again. I want to engage everyone in a meditation that better than that, I'll just do the word sound power. Amasu and panter, sauksu emirhran panter, aura, maketi paherura. And I say this all the time. I pray it in the morning, pray it in the midday, pray it before I go to rest. We give thanks and praise to the one most high. We live each day daily for the one most divine. And we shall do it tomorrow, just as we do it today. Ask for guidance. Don't be so demanding of others when you are not imbuing that with balance within self. Remember that culture heals humanity and that land is a foundation. Spiritual harmony unifies us. And each and every one of us is a house of life within our individual selves, within our families, within our communities, our societies, our nations, our civilization, and wider. So embrace that. I'm very, very grateful. I just desire to make sure that persons, while we're speaking of these things, and why did she even mention the term terrorism? Because even the United Nations, in its infinite wisdom, with the support of humans that are grounded in sacred divine righteousness, designated annually August 21st globally as the International Day of Remembrance and tribute to the victims of terrorism. It's not a moment of silence. It's a moment of grace. It's a moment of upliftment. And it's definitely a moment for us to transform our humanity. So with that, I just desire to make sure that I have offered some reflections, some commentary. Again, we are appreciative of you joining Queen Mother Dr. ChenziRa here with Oz Speaks, Building a New Legacy on the Crew Podcast platform. Again, I give thanks for those that joined, tuned in. I'm always honored to be part of a wider circle of those of us that have so many things that we could share. I send a special shout out to our brothers and sisters in Kenya, specifically outside of Kisumu, our Loa family, that are hosting activities honoring Marcus Messiah Garvey and people that are about the upliftment of the liberation and unification and ancestral sovereignty and sacredness of our people in Kenya. I'm definitely sending a special shout out to President Achola. of the UNIA ACLRC 2020. I give honor and grace to those that are doing the work and organizing and uplifting people. Definitely a shout out for safety and protection for our children in houses and places of learning at this time throughout as the school year has just started here on this side. And again, we send not only prayers, but prayers with action to our families that are experiencing disasters globally, and to those that are laying to rest, those that went all too soon, as well as those that lived a long life. And with that, I say, giving thanks until our next broadcast, the first and third Thursday of each month. We are here, and we are here to thrive, and we honor all that is great, all that is good, and ancestral within our sovereign spiritual selves. Give thanks. Good night.
Roots to globalize. We remember rise and stand. Pan African vision reparations call. Justice and healing for one and all. Audible, these are I heart. Hurry up.